Hello, everyone. It is Sunday, 3:08 p.m. on the West Coast of the United States. Today, we're going to be talking about HANNiEL Park's artwork. And thank you so much, HANNiEL, for submitting and being the third to submit and the last. If anybody else would like to participate, please check out our Discord and submit through the Dropbox link. Um, HANNiEL, I heard from Alex Chen that you may be roughly 19 or 20. Apologies for outing you if that was sensitive information. But I always like to know the context of where somebody is at in terms of their age and whether that's helpful or not to any of us. It's interesting to hear the context because when I first saw your stuff, I was like, oh, that's pretty darn good because I heard about you from Alex and I know that you were a little bit younger, and I think what you're doing is pretty great so far. So what we'll be doing is trying to give feedback to take it to the next level of like sort of like crunching it into a more iconic statement, a more concise statement, and a more readable statement. That at first glance, I'm wondering like what is your uh, design education history coming from? Like, did you take actual classes, or are you just riffing off the same sort of things that we all love in terms of the entertainment art and games, which is a great education, just again for striking iconic statements. Um, and then the other thing is sort of I may have mentioned this before. Um, I was like, what is this aspect ratio? Because you had this long panoramic canvas for your images, and I was like, this is bizarre. I don't understand like why it's so long. And because usually for if you're it's weird to talk about this because in the olden days, which was like a couple years ago, everything would be 16 by 9 so that it'd be up on a TV on a wall, and art directors and executives could review things, and it'd be full screen on a giant TV. Uh, so I was baffled by what this long aspect ratio was until I opened it on Discord and turned my phone, which is an iPhone 13 Pro, from 2001 or 21, and it fits the aspect ratio exactly of my iPhone. Um, I'm 45. That was a revelation to me. It's like people looking at these things on iPhones. Um, I'm like a staunch believer that like art doesn't belong on iPhone. Consumption of art does not belong on smartphones. It's like you kind of just zip past things and you don't really get time to take things in. Um, Sort of beside the point, but it is interesting to think about in this new world where things are reviewed on your iPhone, on your iPad. What's the most correct aspect ratio? What's going to be the best overall? I feel like my gut would tell me still 16 by 19 because if you're on an iPad, your aspect ratio is squashed. If you're on a phone, it's elongated. If you're on a TV, it'll fit exactly. So you're somewhere in between if you're going for the TV aspect ratio. Anyways, long-winded way of saying, boy, these images were long and I didn't understand why. And I also think that you have a fairly decent graphic design sense in terms of layout, and that's sort of going to be tempered by it's also a little bit busy. So like I see there's like a baseline reasoning by how the way things are organized and the harmony and the graphic, like the sort of branding throughout all of your images, which is great. So now we just need to push the hierarchy to push the focus because there's a lot of competing elements. So we just want to say like what's just as a rule of thumb, always give your 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5 after that are just accents that you just kind of um, just make sure are framing elements or something like that. But yeah, again, fairly striking overall. So what we want to do is plus it and pull the graphic design out and make sure that none of that sort of gets interrupted by any sameness. So like whether we're going from positive and negative space, and if you listen to any of the previous two live stream feedback streams we've done, I've hammered this home quite a bit, and it is sort of the thing that I talk about mostly is that idea of proportional hierarchy across all visual components. And if anybody out there, any gracious person who actually would listen to all these videos is probably going to hear that more than they would want to. But I think for the sake of the videos, if somebody only watches 1 or 2, I'll probably keep reiterating. So when I look at a page like this, I know intellectually that these 4 girls here, or the variations, what you're selecting is the main focus, but I'm still getting pulled away into the select screen button, the orthographic drawing, and then this other thing feels like it's some like off on its own. And maybe that's the difficulty of also working with such an elongated um, canvas. Hey, Aiden, I see you in the chat. Um, hmm. And that's just to say, like, what are the tools available to us to utilize positive and negative space, dominant, subdominant, subordinate, accenting statements, dominant statements, and how are they going to facilitate where you want the viewer to go exactly. Like this line work here for the orthographs almost blends in and sort of fades away wistfully into the negative space. So then you almost have this large area where the negative space and that orthographic drawing are almost part of the same family of this subdued background statement. So you got this broad field where this isn't important enough, but the negative space is almost too important in the way that it's also encapsulating that figure, when I should just be focused here. So I always like to think of things in bar graphs or just proportional ratios. And all these girls are cut down the middle for the most part. And maybe they should be in the middle. Maybe that gun could be a base that they're standing on. So then you start to unify the gun and the girl into a dominant statement, but that gun being sort of an underline of that character. So how do we marry things to create a greater statement so that things aren't many disparate elements calling your eye here or there? And that's sort of general feedback for all of these pages. And then also for the character, as we get into her graphic design, like her iconic red and sort of cream color patterning. How do we arrange that red so it's, again, it accents an important statement, or sort of facilitates that important statement, but then also accent areas around, doesn't necessarily distract from the major statement. If anybody didn't read the character brief, it's basically the soft drinks have come to life and they've either become human characters or creepy creature characters, and then the humans all hunt those the creature versions of the soft drinks. And that's what we're looking at here as one of the hunters. You could see how this negative space would go away right away if we did squish this into that 11 by or 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and then you wouldn't have this sort of like floating field where your eye is just getting lost for no reason. And it's our job to make this, like, it sounds tedious and obnoxious when you're saying it out loud, but it's our job as artists to, this is one another great little art nugget that one of my figure drawing teachers in college said, was like, as artists, we should always be designing. So and hit the context of him saying that was like, if you're doing like gesture drawings on a page, arrange them in an elegant way, because you're always trying to flex that muscle of creating some sort of artistry, or also like showing that you care that much that you're pouring artistry into every level of what we're working with. Hmm. My AirPod just made a noise. I don't know if I can, not that I need to hear out of this. Um, yeah, that's enough harping about that. I'll try to do a little bit of quick reorganizing some of this stuff so we can knock down. And another element is like, as an artist, like we should always be designing, but we should also be graphic designers, at least dabbling in that world. I think, yes, on a small scale, this bold typeface is great, especially for the phone and the way everybody is viewing things on phones. But think of it, look at it objectively. Can you see any of these words, or does it just look like a solid block of texture? So the idea is like, how do you entice somebody into an area here off on the world, like to be able to want to absorb what you're saying there? Or how do you make it easier for them to construct, like to lay out the sentences with little bullet points that sort of make it easier to digest? And can you say things with less, especially on a large page that people are just going to be flipping through? I'm just thinking, I think a little bit of like everything being very flat and graphic is sort of bringing everything almost to on the same level of on the picture plane. Like everything's being brought forward. I mean, the character has the black, so it's coming forward a little bit more in the dark gray. Um, but all these numbers here are sort of uh, a little bit too close to some of the other values on the character, as again, as if they're almost on the same picture plane and one is in front of the other. Um, so this would be a good area to where like you could do a little bit of comping or adding a little bit of a gradient to sort of subdue, but also show that maybe there's a transparency or some sort of an effect within that to make that like textural richness and visual beauty within the branding, but not necessarily a statement where the eye goes. Because obviously that sharp edge of the numbers and letters are going to be like as sort of calling your eye as much as some of the sharp edges on the body. So you could do like a Gaussian blur and turn down the opacity on another layer so it glows a little bit. Or you could also do a gradient where it sort of darkens or lightens, so it sort of crunches the values a little bit, so that again they're not coming towards us as much. And then when it comes to the character, not just the graphic design, this sort of relates, but it's all about how do you create something a more concise and solid as a graphic base, or all of that complicated volumetric form that's overlapping one another and creating that solid mannequin structure or like that action figure within the 3D information of the character. So what, and we talked about last week was like there's all of our go-to rules of thumb, like simple versus complex, straight versus curves. That's going to help, and it has helped you here. But how do we be more acutely aware of that as it plays into proportional hierarchy through positive and negative space to create the strongest statement you can, along with all of other visual components, soft edge, sharp edges, chroma variations, value variations, how they're proportionally laid out from head to toe. But I think it was more important here, or more, let me say, obvious in some of these other drawings where like the leg here, the leg here, everything's sort of floating off on its own. We always talk about like these little islands or microclimates of composition that are too disparate from one another and they don't feel like they're part of a stronger solid base. It's usually that thing that comes through in that initial 2-inch sketch that you're doing, where like you're just making large, broad, sweeping strokes and you're creating the graphic design of the pose. But then as you start to put the reality on top of that, things sometimes fall apart. So I have a couple uh, examples here from Power Stone, that Capcom game, from the Dreamcast and the PSP. The second time I mentioned the portable PlayStation, um, the mini disc. But here again, for class, I like to use something that really hits you over the head with the idea of like what we're trying to talk about. And what I always loved about Capcom is that marrying of a strong graphic design, but also like very strong depth and structure, a really solid, concise statement, all these different visual components. And then here's just like highlighting different ways of like of thinking about it. Where's your harsher angles? Where's your softer curves? How are they sort of distributed, right? Because if everything's sort of a visual component or a building block, how do you proportionally balance those building blocks to create a strong statement, straight and readability? So this is sort of trying to strip away the reality of all of the subforms having their own ellipses that are turning those volumes in space, like the quads versus the bottom of the leg, like you see here, the top of the foot, where it's a very clear circle that we're almost looking straight on of the top of the shoe, the metal boot. And just seeing the graphic design, that's sort of the essence of what's going on in that highly representational but stylized final drawing and illustration. Let's see. Hey, we've only been rambling for 15 minutes? That's pretty good. We're gonna try to keep this to a concise hour and a half. No, no need to ramble more than that. So let me open these in Photoshop. Here's your piece. So again, going back to that Power Stone stuff. So even if this is Mega Man Zero, obviously, but still Capcom. Um, how do we find those same through lines, the simple, most concise version that we can then slowly, more thoughtfully graft all of the volumes on in the areas that pop? Like always see like the simple base mannequin, and then where does the costume pop from that? Okie dokie. So at this point, again, we talked about in the past streams, think switching your mindset from or representational thinking to the abstract to take away the daunting reality of what we're actually doing. So get away from the drawing, get away from the tediousness of it, of the representational, and just see the hierarchy of shapes, value, chroma contrast, and see if we can create a better, more striking statement based off that. And I'm only saying striking because I know the kind of artwork that we're going for here. So like, how do we plus it? How do we make it stronger? How do we take everything that's here, all the clay that's on the armature, and then start to nudge it just a little bit more, thicken this, thin that, maybe reorient one or two things. But like not a total redesign, but a plussing, like taking it further through the next sketching phase and iteration stage. So if any of you are familiar, I think this is sort of like a, well, he said soda drinks, but like this reminds me of like some of the milk drinks you can get at like the Korean markets. I think this is sort of like riffing off of the bottle design. So when I look at this, I'm thinking again, lots of little tiny islands of red. And do we need something, a stronger statement? And I'm assuming this is probably her dominant, like the iconic weapon that she'll always be seen with for the most part in marketing illustrations, because obviously different weapons are going to sort of change her overall iconic statement. Um, so how do we go from here to this and make this more iconic, but then also in a way that's going to balance, well, whatever we do here doesn't necessarily conflict with her weapon. And right now, I'm just trying to look at things from the side. If the red's the positive, the base canvas, the cream color is the negative. Like how are things, what's the spacing like? And what's the repetition of both? And also, so my go-to as a rule of thumb is like, this is my focal region. And then the focal region within that is sort of here. So that's where I start to head to the most. I try to emphasize those areas and then de-emphasize other areas, or make sure that whatever's going on isn't necessarily in conflict with those areas. Let me do that one more time. Different levels of close-up shots. And because the hair value and the cream value are fairly close to one another, if you squint your eyes or you gray it all out, they're sort of going to be the same value. So maybe we want to lighten up the hair, or if we don't, right? Because there's always going to be some version of this where you'll be able to emphasize things and control things through different means. And we just need to know what those things, what those elements are that are available to us. Pardon. So the red, being a stronger framing element, is going to call a little bit more attention to the head, like framing the head and leading the gesture back into the composition of the face. And as a rule of thumb as well, we compound our visual component complexity in the areas of focus. And that is one of those rules of thumb that is not always the case and should not always be the case. So some things should be simpler. Maybe that simplicity is the contrast that you want. Pardon. That's interesting because it does look a little bit darker over here. Let's see what we had before. Okay, so that's the same value. Because it could be a matter of, I'm going to brighten up the hair so the whole frame of the head is a brightened statement that's brighter than the cream, brighter than the red, and surrounds the face. And the value contrast of the hair in relationship to the skin tone sort of creates that focus. Or we can do what you had before, and we pump up, we make sure that in the stylization that rim lights are really important, and we really push the graphic design of that, like make that an interesting, compelling statement, sort of baked into the model, and can be affected by lighting, but there's an essence that I was always in a gesture and graphic design that's always sort of omnipresent. And then we can utilize those highlights to bring some of this. Oh, jeez. Sorry. And the same thing with anything, when we do highlights, it's it's sort of the same balancing process of what's your 100% canvas that you're working on, and then what's the ratio, or is it 10%, 20%? How much of the highlights take up a statement? And then that highlight's going to have a design and a graphic that's going to facilitate the focal points and accent the volume, and just add visual interest and juiciness. So I know you have a highlight over here. I'm just thinking, like, do we give that more importance to be that framing element? Or do we brighten the hair, make the whole hair overall the framing element, the thing that's most important? And then we can do a subtler, oops, a more subtle highlight, because the value of the hair has brightened up overall. We don't need such a bright highlight as well. And I still want to create more heaviness with the red. And darker values and broader darker values is going to create a heaviness to the characters. Jesus, sorry. It viscerally, it feels like those things are heavier. So like, how do we how do you want to balance, again, the theater of it versus the reality versus the graphic design? Does the literal thing that the graphics design do for us in terms of creating a focus is that working against the nature of who the character is and how it performs. So like, do we need those things to feel lighter and more wispy? So then we can't utilize that sort of framing element because it's emphasizing the wrong thing. There we go. Right now, I'm just thinking if this element here, trying to marry this into a family, like find a way to make the visual weight of those things become a graphic family that from the front. And this is a little bit difficult because I feel like those three can work together, but here's where it starts to sort of wisp off and become a strong statement in an area that isn't accenting as much, but taking away. You do have some proportions here that seem to get away from us as we get into these other views. Maybe this could be a little broader like you have in that main illustration. Even that, again, it makes it feel so heavy and so strong in terms of like it's bringing the weight of the character down. With the mid drift area in the skirt, I'm trying to get rid of. So you got the trim here, the undershirt, the trim, the negative space, the belt, negative space again, the trim. But I wanted to go back to this sort of like two pattern ribbing pattern as like a dominant statement. So like maybe we could unify this here, all this red and this into that two statement. Maybe from the front you don't see much of the mid drift section. So it still has a break there, but maybe the shirt comes over, pardon, and in the back you catch that breath. So like you get a secondary animation of like maybe this fluttering in the wind. And when doing a turnaround, I'm always working things together, like never doing one thing and then going to the next and trying to match it up because as it turns in space, you may need to readjust something that's going to happen in the front view, which I'm sure most of you know that. Um, Thinking like, can that white be a trim around the bottom? So again, this is a lot of trial and error, and I may try 3 or 6 or 10 versions of this on the canvas itself, and not in iterations that are never presented. But right now, I'm trying to make all this area again, uh, this the focal region, and then this the focal region. So that these three elements, the red here, red here, red here, is sort of good for this composition. And then as we zoom out further, that red being a strong base pedestal for all of this information. And I'm trying to make this less important. So just by making that purely red and then maybe bringing down like ruffles or something around, or just another overlay of a different material, separating it in that way takes it down. So like darkening it like the hair color, maybe treating it like translucent plastic bottle material. So this here and this here become a framing element for what's important here and here, like between these zones. And I'm taking that white away and getting rid of it because again, if this is like, if we're thinking of this as like plastic bottle, like translucency, we could give it some visual interest in terms of the juiciness where like it's an interesting accent, and the hair can have the same sort of iridescent or like fractal quality where you're getting translucency and you can push like stylized lighting where the edges of the rim light can shift towards a blue or a pink purple. It's heavy handed here with the sharp edges, but like as we render, it could just be like a soft little accent, and we can get that same sort of information here and here, and where like the brightness isn't pumping up to call attention, but you're getting visual interest through different means of a material shift, and it's like a slightly special material shift. But again, it's not broad enough in these proportions, in the way it's laid out, to call your eye to it. And getting back to the positive and negative, and I want to get some of that Power Stone action. Use the tension of the fabric to simplify these areas. And as I'm like, now, again, I sort of flounder through these different visual components and maybe get sidetracked as I'm going. But knowing that what I'm precisely working on sort of keeps me in check. So here I'm getting into the negative space. So like, do I want to adjust this negative space so that it creates more motion? Do I want to reorient the way the bottle is positioned so that we get more of a shape with a gesture to it? Or is that stoppage good where it's sort of blocky and it's sort of a strong base for this? And here, I think maybe for the stylization that you're going for, I think we could push this a little bit. And I think it's going to be a better framing element for readability, but also a transition, like a framing clarity for the belt being a clear sort of base. Pardon. Hmm. Now I'm wondering if I push the belt up further from the front view and lessen the importance of this area here. So we make that a broader field of kind of creamy vanilla. So your eye sort of moves more quickly over that. And we marry this zone together, the red zone. So I want to sort of move her pelvis up a little bit higher, and then have that sit on top of her pelvis. Again, I'm trying to find any means of creating more movement within the character's graphic design, because everything is very similarly spaced in terms of these larger elements and smaller elements. And even getting into this, the ins and outs. The rule of thumb is the thing that keeps you moving and gives you a strong base rule of thumb to keep you in check is every plane change gets a proportional in shape or gesture change. So we're going from this elongated angled straight to a smaller straight to a slightly more curved straight into a even longer perhaps. So like small, medium, large in terms of proportion. And then each one's getting a slight shift in angle as well. And then this one gets a little bit more complex because the bottle's going to be popping that lid out a little bit. So we want to be thoughtful about the design of that negative space as well. And it's, again, tedious to say it out loud, but when you make it second nature, it's nothing you're thinking about in a way that's feeling daunting. Like, let's pull this line right up against her back. So like it's very snug. We can get a little bit of a straight and we could show that that's billowing upward. It's adding an angle change in here where there's like a clear corner to that curve so that we're not, again, we're not equal or like we're not symmetrical. And usually like there's different rationales, but um, ideally is like if there's not a lot of, you like set the character up for success down throughout the pipeline. And if it's an animation show or the rigging may not be the best, so you want to do your best to make that thing at its base sort of neutral as compelling as possible. So here where the leg goes up, I'm gonna angle this so it's sort of, again, more motion and less static within the negative, or sorry, the neutral. Um, I don't know if it's supposed to be the bottle caps for her knees, but if it isn't, like I feel like that's a lost opportunity, and also like just an interesting visual pop here, where like we can get a little bit more chunky with the shape design, and then that will lend to a little bit of um, interesting texture. very subtle, right? Because we don't want to add any texture that's going to create some unappealing quality. So like think of like bulbous, friendly texture, and also like maybe that texture disappears. Maybe it's just accenting to give a sense of what it's trying to evoke. Oh man, you got a lot of elements. I was just remembering the separation. You're seeing skin here as well. So there's like so many pattern repetitions and sort of like the light and dark local color value, but then you've got a different material local color value. Tricky, tricky. This is where, okay, it's sort of more form-fitting at the top of the sleeve or the forearm. That makes sense, obviously. But even in this view, I want to push that readability. I got foreshortening here so we can push the circular nature of that ellipse even more. And then this one's flattening out a little bit so it becomes a little bit more oval. Oof, that is a lot of components. So ideally, again, as a grouping, a family of information, I want to try to create that mid drift and these arm elements. You can see it here. Make that more of a statement. Make that feel more married together. And again, easy way to start to contextualize things is think of it as your Jesus, your film camera. Like how are you seeing it in these different far shots, mid shots, close ups? Actually, that's a good place for some asymmetry. Um, like just like you have with the belt, maybe we can go counter that where the belt's coming down this way, and then this is a little bit angled this way. You see a little sliver of that darkness. Ah, God, not looking great. I want to make this a little bit more snug to the rib cage. And like last week we talked about like areas where you can like build more billowy costumes. Any areas where you can make it snug to the figure, to the mannequin, it's going to help with contextualizing the different the difficulties of like soft materials and hard materials, and just keeping a consistency is going to help with that. Um, so like this is like against the bicep, this is against the rib cage and the lats. This strap right against the arm, this is billowing out. So maybe push more of the black to show that cast shadow, that interior shadow. So like having those sort of logics and being consistent with them. So the back being more snug as well. Yeah, I hear a pelvis line. That's just a little bit of demonstration of like reorienting the graphic design of interior elements. Plenty of ways to go about that. And not that this is necessarily the right way. It's just to say that never sort of hold your back in iteration. So make simplify things so that you can keep reorienting, like pushing shapes, marrying things together, create simple versus complex versus elements that marry to frame something versus things that are meant to be accents. And just to demonstrate again, let me try another variation of just addressing the head and how to make the head. What's going on there? Here, Photoshop. What? Okay, bring this back down. Because when I took this off, I was like, oh, there's something interesting going on here with the red. So like, sort of like the guy from Katamari. He's got that like elongated pill head. And I think there's some other, I don't, it's not Space Number 9 or in the early 2000s PlayStation 2 or Dreamcast game. I can't remember. I think it was PlayStation 2. I may be misremembering. It's like a girl with like these large what do you call it? Headphones. So I want to push that horizontal statement. So rather than, oh no, it left in my red. Did I draw on the wrong layer? Killing me, dude. Here we go. We're going to make the visual weight and the heaviness of the red within this zone. And all this red can be just wispy statements like you have going on here. Not that this character needs any more elements, but I was like, oh, what if they did have those retro cool radio antennas on there? But good grief, we already have too many competing elements. I mean, that could be a cool thing for the bottles to do. I'm sure you already have um, any other sketches. You've probably already addressed how these things would animate secondary. Oh, well, there you go. Rambling for no reason. This would be a good place to find where we want to punch up the chroma, like whether it's on these here. So like, is this a slightly brighter? Um, I think it should be, right? Like we want to make it, pull it out from the value of the skin tone. So we'll brighten that up. It's already fairly saturated. And then with whatever's within the eye, maybe that could be the most saturated, but maybe not as bright because we're going to also have highlights on that eye as well. So here we're just, again, we're compounding visual interest within this zone. Visual interest. Now I'm thinking like if that's our graphic design within this, maybe I can echo that here because I just want to add a little bit more padding for the eyes as well because they're butting up against the edge of that hair, which is just creating unnecessary tension. Not that that's always a problem, but it is my sort of go-to. It's like, can I add any more spacing I can to certain facial features that are meant to be the most readable? That does like lend a bit of bubbliness to this region as well. I think before, I know this is sort of like quickly done. I can tell you have not labored this. Um, but if you were doing this, this is sort of the process we'd be harping on about in our own minds. Oh, it's kind of cool. I like the, okay, so these pink things like there's more of an emotion, not necessarily a baked in statement. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if it was baked in because again, to compound the focal regions, like how compelling it is. And you have the number 2 on her chest, and it's just it almost feels like a prison number, or because it's so matter of fact and like sort of low quality in terms of like it almost looks like a sticker or a piece of tape. So if something's going to be there, let's make it like a little bit more important, or make that narrative more of a clear statement and add some visual interest to it. Because again, right now it's just plain and not important on the chest. And a lot of the just the common feedback through a lot of the students we have over the years is it's something that you all do, but sort of this is a thing that falls apart. And sort of what we're going on about when we're talking about the Power Stone stuff is drawing through your design and letting those things, those relationships, carry through to the final image. Uh, so that's sort of what's happening here, where like the little bumps and valleys are sort of falling away from a logical structure of like how material would act, but also how it's falling on the mannequin itself. So we'll talk about that a bit as we go over the other images. Boom. And we talked about in the previous stream is about utilizing animation as a keyword, and and also like not letting rules of thumb or just like popular phrases for feedback like sort of hold you back. Like dig in and find the true meaning behind. If someone gives you something too vague and they're not able to elaborate, if you keep hearing it, just dig in and find somebody who can explain something in a way that's going to make sense of why it is a common element that keeps being um, sort of thrown out there. But it's sort of like hot air, right? If you can't grab onto it and understand where they're coming from with it. So like with this, in terms of animation being a key word for what we're doing with character design, and we're showing poses like those action poses in animation, they always say like push your animation, push the pose. It's like, okay, what do you mean by that? Um, and with this one, she's got roller skates and she's wearing like utilizing what appears to be a high powered weapon, and which is going to have its own sort of dynamic to it. So like you got to get a sense that either she needs some like kind of cool, chunky, like tertiary animation, which would sort of dig in her heels and allow her to stop as she's shooting these things, or it's part of her characters that every time she shoots, she gets flung backwards and like, but she's so agile and adept with the skates. It's just part of who she is, and she sort of just flows through the scene sort of effortlessly, like a butterfly, like on these roller skates, flowing as it's being pushed by the wind of the weapon itself. Um, but aside from that, just basic drawing through and feeling out your anatomy. Um, just don't neglect our through lines. This is where, like, again, you can even step back and get away from the reality of it. Like, what's the rib cage doing? What's the spine doing? What's the leg containing the action doing? And just focus on that, and everything else can sort of be grafted onto that. So, like, this is my thought: is if she's being pushed, she really needs to like hunker down and feel the weight and significance of this. So like she's really tensing her arm muscles, and you're getting these really strong angular statements because she's really flexing and holding on. And then she's also doing the same with this leg here because she's trying to ground herself and not necessarily be being pushed back to, or having no control over how that thing's going to thrust her backwards. So that's one idea. Though if you want a more heightened reality of it, we can keep the rib cage the way you have it. So like more of a heroic superhero chest pose where it's thrust backwards. And then we do the same thing where you have the tension. But again, here is where like it's sort of this bulbous nature of this. It's all static. I don't feel the tension. That's where a straight line is going to come in handy. Sort of emphasize the action through the quality of the silhouette. So as she grabs onto this, sort of flowing into this, and then her palm sort of resting on this. You can see she's like really gripping that hard. And then the legs are sort of more, they're more like the butterfly part of her, which is sort of just being ultra adept to moving these things around, or fluttering through the scene rather. So like this leg doesn't really care what's going on. And also, again, as artists, we're always designing, so everything has some sort of intent to it, and it has some sort of meaning, whether we mean it for it to have that or not. So how do we feel about the quality of the hands, the acting of the hands, the acting of the feet? Yes, the feet. So here is it's matter of fact. It's literally parallel with the ground. It's not telling a story of the character, whether she is cute looking but hardcore, or always sort of bubbly and sort of fluttery, or just good natured, and just the how she moves in general. Because I'm thinking to counter that, we bring it up even further, and pushing it down is going to tell you a statement. Right? It's to tell you one thing where like it feels a little bit more aggressive because it feels like there's tension in her pushing her foot down, because that takes effort to sort of bring it closer towards the shin. Or is it pushed up? Is she more fluttering like a ballerina through this all? Or is it pushed up even further and you always get a sense that her toes underneath are sort of just kind of curled around and enjoying the ride? And also positioning the foot here, like you can say that like she's shooting it off this way in that direction. See? And then we bring these sideways so that as it's going this way, but pushing her back that way, that at least that could stop her to a degree. Maybe she'll still get wisped around this way, but you get a sense that maybe she's trying to control how that thing is taking advantage of how she is on those skates. So again, this is going back to like if it's too complex, you can utilize these abstractions, the Riley rhythms, the Andrew Loomis, like just compositional action lines to tell the story, get the story correct before you go in there and start drawing all the reality. If it's not coming all right, because like some people can just do it all at once, but this is an easy way to go back and assess how you can add some story and have fun. And like, how do you find the interest within these stages that are getting in the way of you getting towards the final? And the final is already difficult enough to draw, and it's already daunting enough. And I just want to draw a good drawing, but you need to find ways, take a breath, and enjoy these other elements that are going to just plus it even further, make people more visually engaged with what you're doing, because it's not the same cookie cutter stuff. Like this is very competent and cool and interesting, but if you're on ArtStation, how the hell are you going to stand out in the crowd if you're just another competent artist? Are you getting people invested into what you're doing? And like, are they, that you're giving them a feeling to take home with them, even if it is just a character from another video game? like they'd be like, damn, I really wish you could see that. And maybe they'll make a comment. It's like, oh, I would really love to see a game with this character. And how does that motivate you and push you to do something? These proportions are all a little bit silly right here. I think that shoulder feels like it's here. I think that would have to be pushed back even further. As so, like if we see her clavicle from the top, it's like really getting thrusted back there. So the top of her rib cage, her shoulders are like thrust back, kind of on both ends. Hand here, spinal column here. Like even this is like, to me, like this face, like that's really compelling and engaging. So then it comes down to, like, again, the costume sort of taking away from that, because you get lost in these zones here. And without the costume having a strong framing element for this, then you just get lost in this area that just isn't that interesting in the execution of the drawing at the moment, but also just the base graphic design, architecture, 3D geometry of the inherent, like, neutral costume design. And same thing here. This is super compelling, but how do we go one step further? And within like something like this, the only way that you're gonna, again, stand out is you have to plus it a little bit further. You have to take it a little bit further away than other artists. So like maybe you're gonna draw a couple cutesy Pokemon character from her world that are sort of surrounding her and watching, and like, is this bursting because she's so enjoying that so much that, like, she's crushing that can or bottle? And then also, like, how does she grab the bottle? Like, having fun with the characters of each fingers. Sort of go back to that Power Stone stuff for this one here. Um, so the reason of flipping our mindset and just seeing uh, abstractions is to see proportion and to see shape design and see if there's any uh, elements that are too similar to one another to create clarity in hierarchy. So like, what do we need to adjust to create a stronger statement? And here, this is the common mistake a lot of us do, is equal proportions through disparate subforms. And how do you contrast through having a greater statement and drawing through forms to make sure that certain things are framing elements and certain contrasts are creating clarity that we want to go. So right now we've got a lot of these sort of very short C curves. And just for sake of argument, not that it applies to this design perfectly, but that you could see how if we just added a triangle, very clear triangle here, that's going to create visual clarity just through the contrast of shape there without even addressing all the other baseline potential issues. And then we have value. Remember, we added the larger, broader value to create a framing element of red around her hair to make that more important. So this is my first thing I'd want to do is I want to draw through and draw the pill shape to be the most important element in terms of framing the head. So the geometry, pardon. I'm going to turn this sort of squashed heart in 3D a little bit more so we're not pushing it in and chopping it off from that 3/4 a little bit too much. And then negative space to separate it has some sort of transitional element from this zone to this zone. Pardon. And in Power Stone, in those Capcom drawings, they'd push this perspective a little bit. And I use the words just like caricaturing your perspective just a little bit more than you think you would. And that just comes back to push it a little bit further, push the pose, push the angle and gesture of the geometry more than you think. Because before, like again, just parallel lines are going to flatten things out and stop the viewer. It's going within that area. We're going from something like this to something like this, in essence, as well as we're trying to push that. So then you have sort of an explosive energy coming from the overall gesture of this and how it relates to this stuff. Like the strength of her arm. You could push the deltoid to be a little bit stronger with this arm here. And again, this isn't necessarily, this is just the essence of the story of the abstractions. It's not the exact outline of the silhouette of what's going on. And maybe the hair comes out a little bit more so that you get that rhythm going in. Because otherwise it's just kind of there. It's kind of matter of fact when you could really, like, you can feel the visceral flow going within, like the particles, the ethereal nature of it flowing in to that focal point. And then that's sort of a contrasting element as well, because you could have that within the leg, but it's not necessarily it's not the focal point. I'm sorry, like within the upper third, or sort of like an asymmetric third, we have all that energy around here, and then what's going on with the body itself can be a little bit more structured and static in comparison. But even here, do like to utilize the rhythms to, just like we showed in some of those Street Fighter examples where we drew over, let these rhythms relate to one another. It is 4:17, so we're about a little over an hour in. These are all great. So I think what I want to do is just try to, again, plus the graphic and point out what I'm seeing as being problematic. And again, I'm only here to reinforce these very simple, digestible ideas because they are ridiculously simple. And it's just a thing that you got to be hammered home. If you're not doing it naturally, you just need somebody to keep encouraging you to create these habits and make sure that they become second nature, so we're not dealing with baseline fundamental issues. And everybody says, like, learn your fundamentals. This is it. It's the simplest shit. It's just, how are we balancing it all? How are we taking it? How, like, are we hearing what they're saying and utilizing it rather than making the same mistake over and over? This is the sort of issue you have with art direction, is like you end up giving the same feedback over and over, and it's the same thing in classes. It's the same few simple ideas over and over. And when you look at all the things that you hold up, so, like, in terms of the things that inspire you the most, it's everything they do in spades, right? It's everything that they understand so well. It's like usually if somebody who likes this kind of artwork, it's usually some awesome artist from Riot or Capcom who does really great dynamic, solid structural drawing and how they graph that to the dynamic or to that solid, clear graphic design. If I haven't said that enough in this one little bitty stream, apologize for the redundancy. I'm all about redundancy. Okay, with this, I'm going to try to heighten. The pose is already pretty great. I think you can push it a little bit further with foreshortening, which if things aren't foreshortened enough, you're not really pushing the ellipses, things start to feel stunted, meaning like the proportions feel off more so than things are actually moving in and out of space, creating that smaller silhouette. But I'll start with the graphic design. But I think first, let me try changing the values on this. That's not what I want to do. Just want a lighter value so I can see the shapes a little better. Okie dokie. And here I'm just going to break the drawing to get a better read. More negative space here because again, everything's getting lost in the story of the hands in the face. You can think of like a 3-point compositional element. And then also this gun should feel like it's framing the character, not necessarily like getting lost within the character. As a general rule of thumb, if you can stage the acting, where am I on the camera? Away from the head or away from like parts of the silhouette, the interior silhouette, the more success you're going to have creating clarity. And she's holding that large gun. I know there's a heightened reality where like you don't have to think about it too much why a character is just flipping around a huge gun and not necessarily affecting the physics of the character and like the tension of the muscles and the tendons. But again, if everybody's not thinking about that, can you infuse that into the character and make the character relate more to the environment, meaning the gun and how she's built within that world? Is that something that's going to set yourself out a little bit more apart from other artists doing the same type of artwork? And there's a lot of them, right? And it's so I'm still like sort of flabbergasted by the amount of like because art was always competitive, but now it's competitive in a way that's just shocking. And it would be hilarious if hilarious if it wasn't if all this wasn't connected so dearly to our healthcare. And if that doesn't scare you enough, which I know if you're young 20s, like you're not thinking about your healthcare as much as you should, that should scare you. It should be a motivating factor. It's like I'm gonna get dope because I like dope healthcare. And then you start to resent artists in Canada or or Europe. You can be a comic artist and not have to worry about your healthcare. Are you kidding me? Oh, those are the bottles? Didn't see that coming. Okay. Oh, cool. They're like kind of translucent. That's awesome. I think this one, I'm just, again, drawing through, finding the mannequin, and then finding how I can push the pose. And right now, the quality of each leg feels like it's a little bit too floaty. Like she's she's not grounded at all. So one leg should contain the action of the pose, uh, or both, right? Like, are they both firmly planted on the ground? It's just right now that like one isn't telling us a story over the other. Um, but I like the idea of like this one feels nice and like floaty, so it feels like she could be going backwards. It's like she's just kind of rolling on that foot, and this one could just be like just this wheel is touching the ground just to balance her a little bit. And again, it's those little tiny quirky things, like how a character's holding a cup, how the character is interacting with the world, like, and everything should be done with intent, because if it's not, it's who knows what it's going to convey to somebody and how they're going to react to it. So here's like all those we talked about, like equality, or like things that are too uniform, or too many of the sameness in areas where it's going to be, is it creating a problem or not? And here I want to show things are flowing backwards, so I think I want to simplify that so that becomes a large proportion. And then maybe here I can let the hair sort of flutter and wisp in the wind if she's going backwards now. It doesn't necessarily look good. Trying to have the best of both worlds. Like maybe she turned her head and we get a sense that her head's turning. Good gracious. I've been coughing since 2021, everybody. Very sorry. Hey, Aiden, I saw you've been studying the Capcom art books. Have you checked out that one? It's a thicker one. I don't know if it's the 20-year anniversary, but it has all of the art sort of sectioned off by artist, which is the first time I knew exactly who did what. Because I think there was like I wasn't clear on some of the Akimon versus Bengus stuff. Hey, Chris. I'm not sure what Chris that is, but hello. In reassessing my own sketches, I'll get rid of information just to get the right feeling. That's sort of what I'm doing here, because I know there's actual geometry that needs to be there, but um, I want to first get the correct story and emotion. I feel like this is becoming really important, like the way that taps on the ground and contains a little bit of stability. And I think maybe it could also be pushed as well a little bit further. Just for some counterbalance, but also like the animation is still stunted. We haven't pushed the animation as much as we should. You can see there where like that flow ends up becoming, starts to feel like a little bit more connective tissue with the overall pose. We want to get these rhythm lines throughout the figure, and this is why we keep harping on like draw through your forms, draw through your figure, and let that come through into the final realized geometry. And even so like when getting into detailing this, just like saying things out loud start to feel like just ridiculous at a certain point, but it is the subconscious thoughts we want of these sentiments. Because again, I'm thinking of everything in terms of proportion. So if we're looking at just the rhythm lines, good gracious, I never want that. Why does anybody ever want that? The dominant statement sort of being the large flowing lines throughout the top to bottom of the figure, and then the horizontal angled lines sort of being subdominant to that in terms of actual square footage, but more important towards the focal point. So like think of this base one as like the base structure of the pose, and then the rest of the are the ones that are sort of like creating emotion or motion throughout the compositional, the focal area. So like the zone, which is this upper half, upper third in the head. And that's to say that if we're not thinking about it in that terms, or some sort of organization, whatever it may be, that creates the clarity we need, if we start doing that everywhere and we start to have a lot of crazy elements going against the grain, because the major statement is the upward motion, that's the simplified gesture flowing up, then we're going to get a lot of this, again, just the same way you could stop the viewer's eye with strong value contrast in areas away from the focal point. It's the same issue, but through different means, through a different visual component. And we're trying to verbalize and take category of what are all of our visual components. And then once we really have a good handle of those, we can balance them and create harmony. Go away, line. Oh, cool. Aiden, could you post up the ones that you have in the inspiration thing? And I'll see if one of those is the ones we were talking about. And if not, I'll post that one up as well. We're talking about Capcom art books. And even here, you can see how just the upper shirt, how I'm like adding an angle to it to push the depth and the Z depth away from us and sort of in the space, but also pointing towards the focal region, moving in throughout this area, rather than something sort of flat. You've got like three ellipses and they're all doing the same thing. And they're not creating motion one way or the other. So as a general rule of thumb, we avoid parallel lines in equal proportions. So here, if the belt has parallel lines with equal proportions, then the shirt does not. The different material that's sort of acting in a different way. So let's say that, just for sake of argument, this is wrapped around the body, nice and snug, and this is flowing through the energy of the pose. So you're getting asymmetry and you're getting a pushed, inferred spatial dynamic. I think to riff off of that, I might bring this hair down even further because I want it to feel uplifting. So like as that other hair flows away from us, this is coming down. If she's turning her head, and this is getting pushed away. Not in, again, I do this stuff as this is all the sculpting and reorienting on the page in my layers that aren't necessarily always shown in the final, because I might do that and I have a logic for it, but then I zoom out and I realize, oh, that doesn't look as good, and I have to come to terms with that and make adjustments. Push the pose, push the animation, push your negative space. It wasn't clear here if this was a tube going into those things, but I guess that makes sense. And that's another staging thing where like that needs to be clear, because that's part of what you're communicating, at least to get, whether it's a marketing illustration or it's a concept design, we want to understand that stuff very clearly. So staging for the tube, because the tube is important. This is where it becomes problematic, because the more dynamic statement is going to be the tube going behind that and pushing into here. I mean, but it lends to an area of visual complexity, and it's a lot of stuff to balance. And even if you black out the silhouette, this may stop the eye, but within the illustration, we can fade that out so that our eye blazes across that, and this becomes that stronger triangle we need to lead the viewer through the action of the pose. So the reality of it is it stops, but the value of it is going to change the reality of the actual physical object and how we take in the overall illustration. And again, that's just one option. I can do 6 more to figure out what's best, but we don't got time for that. Trying to just push a little bit ins and outs to make the silhouette of the gun a little bit more interesting. Yeah, the hair doesn't look great. I overall I like what you did more, but in the spirit of pushing the energy of the pose, I think we need something more flowing. Chapow. Um, if anybody thinks this brush is interesting, I'll throw up my giant list of brushes on the Discord within the resources folder. It's just it's fun because you can do some really hairy sketching if you like to sculpt with a lot of lines, but you can make that line thin enough to sort of figure out your forms and structure, but then it gives you just a nice sort of taper that a regular circle brush wouldn't give you. And I think it's just another brush from the old, very, very old Jamie Jones set. And I think that comes from the old Seigen forum boards, I think. And like him and Craig Mullins may have passed brushes back and forth to each other. But I don't really know the story behind it all. It's just what I heard a long time ago, and I don't know how much of it is accurate. That sort of wisps us out away from the pose, and I want it contained, so I like that this sort of brings us back in. And you can see this repetition too becoming an area where the pure abstraction of bumpity 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 is not creating clarity. So we want bumpity bumpity boppity. So, and also there's just too much, like, pose your hands with nothing but a box and do your fingers off of that. Like, pose it in some way that makes it compelling. And if you got a good graphic design, you don't have to, especially with a small drawing like this, you don't have to go in there and figure out the fine arts representational realism of it all. Just make us care about the interest of it, like how it's squashing and stretching and how she's like being silly with it. This would be her pinky. Maybe it's kind of white knuckled. Maybe it's the thumb. It's sort of sticking out. Again, nothing about that is reality, but you know that your palm squashes, right? So we want a little bit of a bowing out here. We want that box to feel like it's butting up against that handle because it's a strong, mighty handle and she has to wield that thing. So when it comes to the hands, again, make the silhouette, tell the story, figure out the hard stuff later, like everything we've been talking about here. Do a couple more of these. It's 4:38 right now, so I'll take a couple more minutes to go over these, and I think we'll wrap it up so I don't just ramble for another 3 hours. Try to do this quick. Quickity quick. Here we go. Kerplunk. This is going to be me just drawing through forms. Pushing gesture. Hmm. I kind of like this nonchalant way that her hand is in her pocket, but again, it's so nonchalant to the point where it's not telling much of a story. So I think there's a really cool thing going on with the boxiness of her shoulders. Um, but I'm sort of willing to sacrifice that by having this strong, simplified gesture that flows right into this arm over here. Now, now I think about it, I don't know what the hell's going on with this arm. Daniel, where are you? I don't know what's happening. Maybe coming up here. That could be kind of cool. Grabbing onto that. Um, but that's the sort of simplified base that'll lay all this complexity on, and then that'll give me a chance to bring the elbow down further and make her feel even more relaxed as she's just kind of casually has her hand, maybe her thumb sticking out of her pocket. Find my center line, the ins and outs of the rib cage, stomach, pelvis, angle of the pelvis. And certain things I won't draw on the job, but for class, just like the point of like add extra, just so that we know like what we're thinking on when we're sketching. I think the face is getting a little small in this one, so I think overall I'd broaden up the head so that I can broaden up the face. Make this like more of a flat beret as it comes down here. So you got like a nice soft curve with a corner and then a sharper corner that to this like elongated S curve. And then it goes into a sharp angle here as it counters. So you're going from concave to convex out this way. Now that I did that, I sort of want to take this whole thing and push the pose. Maybe the angle of that goes up further the way she's holding it. Then I'll try to create more clearance. Push this down further. Utilize this guy here to be a framing element. Like push the gesture of it so it rather than sort of takes you out of the composition, but hopefully you can push it back in. So just push that shape to be more of a C curve. This, I almost want to throw that because again, she's important. So I could push that behind her and down a little more. Make that be a framing element for the shoulders. Push this back further so that, again, the gun is a framing element for her. Almost feels like it could use a transition element as well. And this is a sort of a static shape that I want to add a little bit of motion to. Whether it's beefing up the negative space here. The cool thing about the geometry of these things is you could show the underside, like really move it through space. I probably don't want the shadow to be a dominant statement. But if it was Capcom, they would push this even further. Oh goodness. Give me my brush. Push the lens on this so that's more foreshortening within that. So this is coming towards us, and this is going away from us a little bit more. Pushing the pose, pushing the pose. Face. There we go. Again, I'm trying to find the competing rhythms, the overall rhythms, and how we can balance them. Because right now the body and the gun are equal in proportion, and the gestures are equal in proportion. So you're just creating a large X. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create more upward, elegant motion versus this very harsh, mechanical, structured gesture. So a little bit more flow and a little bit more of an uplifting nature. So that's why we elongated the leg, pushed down the toes. And also tried to just add a little more visuals to countering that overall X. So like the way that this flows could kind of flow into the rest of the pose here. So you have motion that's bringing you in and up through the pose through a couple different means, like the straight X, but then something countering that, but flowing, these linear elements flowing, like as it frames the base and sort of creates a circular statement around that base, and this leg sort of is part of this. It's a lot of stuff to balance, but if you do it through the the most simplest means, get rid of all that daunting drawing, just work with these abstractions, and you can just pose the mannequin in its most simple boxy form using straights versus curves and S curves, and being thoughtful about what you're communicating. A puffy form or a strong structured form through a straight or a curve. these are fairly circular, so we could add again motion by just tapering those into ovals. And ovals that are not equal in proportion, so if that's just a circle that's squished, then that would be right down the middle. But we want some sort of ellipse or oval that is creating motion. So that means the peak is proportionally not 50-50, but one way or the other on the other side. I guess like kind of creating line movement that way. Not ears. I think they're just if you go back through his images, they're characters based off of soda pops or soft drinks rather. So she's like she feels like she's determined. So I almost want to push that sort of like forward motion with her. A little bit focused, so maybe I'll tilt her head down slightly as well. This is tricky because these things are sort of equal. Something, I guess maybe the gun should have more importance than the ammo as an accenting element here. Sort of just spinning the wheels here. I feel like we've gone over everything that we could for today within the time frame. But again, I think the value of the stream is like it's not going to be like incredibly comprehensive. It's just I always found it valuable to have an artist draw over my own artwork and tell me what I was doing wrong and how to fix it in actionable ways. So hopefully that's I demonstrated ways that some things that you could hopefully utilize to plus your own design or sort of reevaluate the next stage in your sketching phase. Because I mean, when I do things for for work, it's brutally um, not appealing or interesting, and I have to sort of throw things down and sort of sculpt it and massage it into what I want it to be. Actually, I kind of now I'm thinking about it again. Story, like let the story make your stuff more compelling than the next person because there's a flood of competency when it comes to drawing and baseline decent character designs. And that's already hard enough. But to find somebody who can you can hire to work and you don't have to hold their hands through the project, that's the difficult part. Um, so learn the fundamentals. But tell the story in a way that's compelling through the very few means you have within a character design. So the reason when I glanced at your piece here, I was like, oh, she looks, at least my impression was compared to these other ones, she looked more determined because she's slightly upright. She seems like she's on the phone, and maybe she's like talking to somebody, she's going towards an action, she's focused towards it. So like, to whether that was the intent or not, that's the story I got out of it. The story that I'm trying to plus through making her more determined by pushing her shoulders and chest forward. She's meeting the world head on by bringing her chest forward, and she's focused by tilting her head down slightly, right? You can't see that here. None of the drawing is actually here. It's just posing the mannequin in a way that's going to tell a story that get you excited about what you're actually going to be executing, rather than here's just another cool character and I want to work at Riot with the 400,000 other people who will not get hired because there's only 2 positions open. As dark as that sounded, I'm just saying, for God's sakes, please put some love and care and make me care about what you're drawing, and it's not just the same old. Because I'm like, what, like, I'm 45, so I'm like thinking like, man, am I over this stuff? Like, am I like, just the act of drawing and painting, is it becoming boring? Like, do I even want to continue with my own stuff? And like, yes, obviously the answer is fucking yes, because what else are you gonna do? And also, it's a compulsion that, like, that it's not a job, it's something that your hands have to do or you'll lose your fucking mind. um but when in a world where things feel so oversaturated, and where I'm going back to old anime because I can't, like, there's a flood of new anime that I don't even want to, like, for my own personal taste, don't even want to interact with. How do you break through to be something that other people care about? And I know maybe going off on a tangent here, but it just, to wrap it up, it's about how we're doing something. So let's do something for a reason, and like, to feed your creative soul and to make somebody's life better through the art you're putting out there, the meaningful art, right? You're not just, because I look at a lot of designs on ArtStation and they go like, oh, these are like base avatars, really well done, but not characters in their own right. And that's sort of unfair as well, because you could look at Kakashi as like an example of a guy who, surface level, seems superficial until you learn about his story and how those superficial details relate to him throughout his life story, which is amazing and wonderful. But how do you evoke that when you don't have time to tell that story? So how do you make them care, um, with just that one 3/4 image that you have? So thank you guys for watching. Go forth and spread the good word.